Yeah, thank you for having me, Iris, and I'm delighted to join the first BioLadies meeting of the year. So I'm Darshil. I'm an associate professor in Cambridge. I'm a material scientist, but I work in the architecture department. And I've been working on natural materials, mainly plant-based materials like timber and bamboo, but also fibrous materials like hemp, jute, date palm fibers for composite applications, which end up either in the built environment sector or for the automotive sector, sometimes for the marine sector. Uh, because plant fibers and natural materials generally are multifunctional and have so many interesting and useful properties, we can usually find a variety of homes for them as sustainable alternatives to things like concrete, steel, and conventional plastics. But today's talk, very briefly, I'll be speaking about what we've been learning from ancient fibers. And I'm based in the architecture department, which is actually in the School of Arts and Humanities. So we like to bring together the arts and the sciences and humanities and technology to look at the past, understand the present, and then derive new solutions potentially for the future by understanding both interdisciplinary as well as um, global challenges that we are currently facing. So a lot of this work has been in collaboration with my colleagues at the University of South Brittany in France, Dr. Alain Bormond, and Dr. Alicia Maleli. I think Iris met some of them at the conference recently. And we also have Dr. Anita Keels from the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology in Cairo, and also the Louvre Museum, Roberta Cortopassi, who gave us many of these materials. So we've been looking at Egyptian textiles 4,000 years ago and trying to compare the linen fabrication and processing methods that they were using and how these compare to our processes today, and how the plant has changed, how the fibers have changed, how the processing has changed. As I mentioned early on, we are primarily interested in technical applications of these plant-based materials. So starting from the agricultural processes of how linen or flax or hemp or jute are grown, the advanced agro techniques that are used to cultivate them and then harvest them, and processes such as retting, decortification, as well as hackling and spinning that we may be doing to convert these fibrous feedstocks into textiles, which we can then produce into woven, non-woven, a variety of different materials, which are then impregnated with polymers for applications such as wind turbines. And a lot of our interest at the Center for Natural Material Innovation at Cambridge is on structural components. So we are interested in fibers such as bamboo, cotton, hemp, flax. And as you can see in this image, although from the outset, we may think these fibers are very similar, actually the plants and the fibers they are derived from are very, very different. And you can see that just from the fiber structure over here. Bamboo itself has 10 cell wall layers, flax primarily has 3, and the thicknesses, the dimensions, and the quantities you get are also very different. So understanding the entire supply chain is quite critical, and that is why looking at historical practices is also quite important. And then this slide is mainly to demonstrate the importance of linen, flax. France is the world's largest producer of flax in the world. It produces about 104 kilotons of flax fiber annually, around 80% of the world's production, primarily going into textiles, as you can see over here in the fashion sector, some household applications, decorations as well. Only 3% ends up in the technical applications, which we are interested in, so as reinforcements for the automotive or wind turbine sector. And materials like flax have been quite important also symbolically. France definitely takes it as a key symbol of its heritage and value, but also Northern Ireland. So the Northern Ireland Assembly, the symbol, the emblem of it are 6 flax plants and flowers. And these represent the 6 counties in Northern Ireland, as well as symbolic of the historic practices of flax cultivation in the area. So I'm not sure how many of you have been to Belfast, but if you go to the Titanic Museum, you find out that the 2 main things Ireland was terrific at was flax production and shipbuilding, and these 2 combined quite beautifully. So it's been quite important for human civilization, and even before it got cultivated in Northern Ireland, obviously the Egyptians had been cultivating it. So you can see some paintings dated to 1295 BC in the tomb of Senedjem, how flax used to be cultivated by the Egyptians, where you can see men and women basically uprooting the flax plant after it has grown for a couple of months, and some other different processes of harvesting as well, in which they are using sickles, for example, for harvesting the plant, and then converting that into textiles. And these fibrous plants have been really important to human civilization. I think very recently a paper in Nature demonstrated that the Chinese had been cultivating hemp for over 12,000 years, and that predates active cultivation of food crops as well. So perhaps fibers were even more important to our cultivation processes than food. And that's something we are looking at increasingly as well, which I'll briefly mention later on. So with the Louvre Museum, we looked at a variety of different textiles that were made available to us. These are actually collections, a combination from the Louvre as well as the British Museum, and a variety of different dates. You can see burial linen as well. Here you can see hair nets that are converted, beautifully laced using flax, and then some mortuary linen again, and shawls that have been produced for usually the upper classes, using very fine linen dating back to somewhere between 2000 BC to up to very recently, in the sense of 400 AD. And now, funnily enough, France, being the biggest producer of flax, sends seeds over to Egypt for the production or cultivation of flax. So it's interesting how the economies and the trade between these materials has also evolved. Flax were also used for some of the first biocomposites of the world. So these are flax cartonages, in which they use plaster, for example, as a binder with flax for mummification. Briefly looking at the advances in agro-breeding processes, so just over 60 years here, you can see how the plant has been bred very differently to significantly increase the yield content of the fibers, because that is the more high value component, and reduce the waste material. Here you can also see something that has tremendously changed is our practice of retting the plant. Historically, and prior to the 20th century, including in France, Northern Ireland, and in Egypt particularly, we used water retting processes that the Egyptians were using. However, because they were using slightly more harsh mechanical harvesting or extraction techniques, we also find many more defects, such as kink bands. And these kink bands are really interesting because they are also related to the durability of the plants. And naturally, kink bands don't exist in fibers, or at least that's our hypothesis, because when we have imaged plants, we don't find any kink bands. So these are presumably the result of mechanical beating of the plant to extract the fibers. And now we use mechanized systems which are much more sensitive to the fibers. So in some ways, while we have lost the individualization of the fibers, we have started to produce fibers that have less defects. And we've used, for example, spectroscopy techniques to understand what the differences are within the defects as well. And finally, I think this is my last slide. This shows, for example, also the changes in the fibers we are noticing. For example, in the old flax fibers, we have less variability. So again, something that's fascinating to us. We have done so much, but we are still producing significantly higher variability of crop, whereas the ancient fibers have less variability in their fiber diameters as well as lengths. And we also find that the fiber diameters are smaller, which possibly would mean that they are higher strength as well. We have not been able to test the strength as such yet, and this is some work we are doing over the next couple of years now. And then this image on the right demonstrates some images on an atomic force microscope where we are actually mechanically testing each single fiber cell walls, looking for information whether cell wall microstructures and polymer organization is different. And we find that indeed old flax tends to have a stronger cell wall material. And we don't know why. It's something we are trying to ascertain. And we have a PhD student, Clara Gusson, who has just started on a French National Research Agency project in which we are looking at these ancient textiles across the 4,000 years much more closely. And we have also started some research with Camilla Alde and colleagues in the archaeology department at Cambridge, where we're looking at 12,000 years old bast fibers from hunter-gatherer communities in Chile and Peru in the Atacama Desert, who use these fibers for fishing shellfish. They were marine hunter-gatherers, and we are trying to understand how it may have developed their hierarchies in societies as well, and how farming may have made them sedentary from hunter-gatherers. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview of some of the work we've been doing. But I'd love to gain from your expertise as well and from your feedback and comments.